Welcome to Joy in Our Town. My name is Jennifer Ann Richardson and I'm your host. I need to warn you that the subject matter today is probably going to be a little graphic, maybe. So I would advise that if you have any small children, if you would just remove them out of the room for about 15 minutes or so while we proceed with this show. Thank you. Most people consider human life to be sacred and precious. This value comes from a healthy fear of God. In recent years, there has been a rise in the incidence of teens committing senseless acts of evil against innocent people. Most of us are at a loss to understand, let alone explain, this kind of behavior. Today, we're going to delve into this dark topic with my guest, Dr. Ken Brown, from Hope Counseling, in the hope of preventing future horrors. Dr. Brown, welcome to Joy.
Thank you, Jen.
Teens that commit unspeakable acts of violence was virtually unheard of in this country. What do you attribute to the rise of this sort of evil?
Well, having been a police officer for 10 years in Toronto, and now been a clinical counselor for 25 years, I've seen this rise of evil. And I've thought about this, especially being a domestic interventionist, I've thought about this at great length and deeply. There's a lot of different factors that explain the rise of this evil. I mean, this rise epidemic of teenage violence. They include single-parent families, the violence that's happening inside the home, the pervasiveness of use of alcohol and drugs, gang violence. Certainly there's a social paradigm, a social zeitgeist, where there's acceptance of violence as perpetuated in the TV, video games, music. Unfortunately, our youth are conditioned to violence because of the acceptance of violence in our society.
Well, we're going to get to that video game in just a moment. Some people say that those who kill their family or other innocent people are just bad eggs. Do you support this notion?
No, I don't think they're just bad eggs. I think that every single person that's ever been born is made by God. According to Psalm 139, God doesn't make mistakes. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. But I do think that, sadly, some children are brought into a very desperate situation, a home where there's violence perhaps in the home, or drugs or alcohol, or unfortunately parental supervision is missing, so that these children don't have the supervision that they need. They're not monitoring their media intake, and sometimes the kids just get involved with the wrong peer group. So I think these children unfortunately are programmed, children are programmed to violence. Now, there are at any given time in society with male children, 9% of children have a conduct disorder, and some smaller proportion have a more serious, a more serious condition that eventually progresses into sociopathy, antisocial behavior. Now, they think that perhaps at any given time 2 or 3% of the adult male population are sociopaths. And the sociopaths are people that are born with a part missing. When you talk about bad eggs, they're born without empathy, without the conscience, without the part that makes us human. They seem to have been developed and grown up, and somehow that part where that cares about another person, that feels for another person, has been broken or is missing. So when they say that guilt is a moral anxiety, but these people, in a sense, don't have that anxiety. Most sociopaths don't get frightened over things that would frighten you and me. They don't have that fear. They don't have that conscience. They don't have that guilt. They don't have that regard for human being. And mainly, what the part that's missing is that empathy, that caring, that natural compassion, that natural humanity that all of us need. And they don't have that. So when you talk to these people, it's rather frightening, because you're looking into their eye, but who's looking back at you may not be a whole human being. Now, they might be quite charming. They may be saying the right things, but somehow when the rubber meets the road, when it comes down to, showing up and being a human being and caring, and they just don't have what it takes. These are the type of people that eventually and potentially become violent.
What could cause a young person to be taken captive by evil influences?
Scott Peck wrote a book, The Road Less Traveled. A lot of people know that book. But he also wrote another book called People of the Lie. In the People of the Lie, written by Scott Peck, he talks about this. He talks about people actually becoming in bondage to lies. Of course, as a clinical counselor, a sociologist, we think that, well, is it because there's a part of the brain that's missing? Are you producing too much dopamine, you know, or too much adrenaline? There's other people that say, well, no, it's not that at all. What happens is that people become connected to evil. They watch evil, they listen to evil, they super saturate their spirit and their mind with evil. We're spiritual beings. And what happens if a person gives themselves to evil, then evil takes over. Unfortunately, in our modern society, most people don't even believe that there is such a thing as true evil. I mean, if you understand about the Holocaust and what happened in Nazi Germany, you can't help but understand and believe in pure evil, that human beings are capable of great evil. And so, some people have talked about the demonic, a supernatural possession of people. Of course, these are popularized in some movies. When you look at what happened in some places, in Columbine and other places, what happened just in Norway, you can't help but think that a person has somehow been taken over. They've given themselves to evil. There's no conscience. There's no concern for another human being. And what they were doing and what they were capable of doing was beyond what's understandable by the average human being. And we call that evil. Mm-hmm. And I think that, in fact, that people can give themselves to the dark side, to the dark force in a sense, and then be taken over. And then every thought, every decision comes out of this anger and this violence that is just, we don't understand it. It's to the average person, we don't understand why would a person shoot children. It doesn't make sense to us.
No, it doesn't. What role does mind-altering substances play in these scenarios?
Well, in the Greek, pharmakeia, which is a root word for pharmacological substances, also is the root word for the supernatural, for the demonic. So we know that in a lot of cultures, when they go into trances or seances, that they use mind-altering drugs. They use mescaline, peyote, they use LSD, the Timothy Leary things. We know that sometimes when people become alcoholics, they drink too much or they go on drugs, that what it does, alcohol, even in small amounts, suppress the judgment centers of the brain. Right. The very part of us that is human, the very part of us that uses clinical judgment not to drive our car when we've had too much to drink. Mm-hmm. And of course, being a former police officer, most of the occurrences, and especially domestic violence, I've attended over 2,000 domestic occurrences, I've placed over 200 abusers in jail. One of the things I've seen invariably is it seems that alcohol was always implicit. So I would say that alcohol and drugs, they say when the booze goes in, the wit goes out. When a person is on drugs, they cease being human, in a sense. They lose the judgment centers and they lose their compassion. So some of these violent crimes happen when they're under the influence.
What effect does television have on the rise of violence?
Well, besides the movies that we see and all these, 300 and the horrible movie 7, and there's all these movies where they Kill Bill, you've got these movies where everybody's being killed and the body count rises. And I mean, actually there are some websites that actually count how many bodies, how many kills there are in a movie, 3,000, 5,000. Can you imagine in a 2-hour show, you've just seen 3,000 people killed?
Unbelievable.
I mean, unbelievable, yes. But it's not just that. There are cartoons out there. Right now, Gumby, when I was a kid, Gumby was a claymation. Right. This new claymation, Gumby, is a horrible program that is violent. There's a thing called Billy Zim. I mean, there's a program that's just, it's horrible. This person has a Billy Grimm. He actually has death as his buddy. He's tamed death, and he uses death to kill other kids.
That's a cartoon?
It's a cartoon for kids.
No.
And there's another one called Invader Sim. Invader Sim, this is a cartoon. This student is trying to take over the world, and do you know how he does it?
No.
He takes students out of school, he takes their body organs, and he harvests their organs so that he can live. and these are cartoons that are on television now. And if our society is so sick and so twisted that we think children should be able to watch cartoons like that, then every single sitcom and all these movies have such violence in it, profound acts of violence, and the evidence is in. Anderson and, I'm going to say, there's 3 different other people that Anderson works with. Anderson is a sociologist, and he's done 3 different studies with co-authors. And all of these studies have proved conclusively that the violence in movies is having a radical effect in making more violence. Violence begets violence.
What are some signs that a young person may be ready to go off the deep end?
Well, there's a lot of signs. I mean, we have checklists that we use, 25. First, if you're considering it, if that question comes through your mind, you should have that child in counseling. You should get that child assessed. The American Psychological Association has a test. It's right online. You can find online, you know, but in a nutshell, there's all sorts of things that we have to look at. We have a point system. We grade this: suicidal ideation, drug abuse, you know, desocialization. The person was sociable and suddenly they're not. They start to check out. They start to become belligerent. Their violence, antisocial behavior, fire setting, kicking the dog, you know, hurting an animal, truancy at school, rebellious behavior. If you can't talk to your child, if you feel like you're walking in eggshells, if you think that your child is going to detonate on you, you get that child into counseling, because that child could have the signals of being someone that could potentially become violent. There's a lot more than that.
I'm sure. One thing I've learned is that as a parent myself, I have to know my child. You know, sometimes my daughter will say something to me and I'll say, you know, this is what you're thinking. She says, Mommy, how do you know? Because I know you. You know, I have this relationship with her, and that's so important. You have to have a relationship. Yeah. Dr. Brown, we have 2 minutes left. Are video computer games implicated in violent acts?
Yes. What happens with the computer games, I wanted to bring this up particularly because in psychology we look at 4 different things. We look at what happens in your behavior, your belief system. When you're playing, you're giving yourself to these computer games, especially in the role-playing games, RPG, role-playing games.
Yes.
And then what happens is that all the Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Then what happens is that you actually develop a belief set that violence is okay. But not only that, we program ourselves by programming our nerves. It's called cognitive behavioral programming. What happens is that we then say violence becomes an acceptable option given these circumstances, including killing bystanders. You know, some of these games are so horrifying.
Yes.
You know, road rage. I mean, it's, you know, killing, and now they're getting more points for killing bystanders.
Yes, they do.
But not only that, it negatively affects the other things. It reduces the belief that violence is wrong, and it reduces the skill set, the set of behaviors that says we should look at non-violent means to solve problems. So what it does is it actually programs your nerves to do the wrong thing. As a matter of fact, the military is counting on this. They actually find some of their best pilots are those that are into computer games because their nerves are so programmed.
Yes.
But unfortunately, those violent computer games are working against us.
Dr. Brown, we have 1 minute. What can we do to reduce or prevent these types of terrible occurrences?
I think you started, Jen, to say it. Parents that love their kids, that know their kids. Parents that love their children enough to ask the questions. You know, drill or fill. That's why I always say, you know, do you want to have your teeth cleaned and have good dental X-rays, or do you want to drill and fill? You know, a lot of times these kids sadly come to me. By the time they get to me, they're already abscessed. The tooth is already removed, so to speak. And of course, they're hollowed out on the deepest part of their inside because they've been watching TV and having movies and having violent rap music, for instance. And they're in gangs and they're drinking. So I think that parents have got to look at this preemptively, do a preemptive strike in teen violence for loving your kids, getting them help, getting them counseling. If you start to see your child withdraw, get them help. Get them to talk to their pastor. Take them to church. Get them into a youth group where they can have something positive. And God can help these kids, but you got to do it early, because sometimes if you wait too long, these kids become ruined. And it breaks my heart. It's often by the time they come in to see a clinical counselor, there's so much damage and trauma. Now, God can do the impossible. God can still help them. But the truth is that they've been so hurt already that it's very difficult to reclaim them.
Dr. Brown, you know, we started off so low, but I'm so happy that we ended up on a high note, you know, that there is joy in this solution. There is joy. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you for being with us, and there is joy in the solution. If you would like more information on today's topic, you can contact our guests using the phone number or web address on the screen.